When you have a government which is criminalizing dissent like that as terrorism, that to me is fascism, because it's saying you cannot have, you don't have any democratic rights if you are going against the government policy, which is participation in the genocide and has been for nearly 2 years. He opposed the war in Iraq. I've done a lot of work on Keir Starmer and his history and his road to power. And basically that period was the only time he took a moral position on anything. I think it's wrong to impute any ideology or any principle to Keir Starmer. He's not right-wing, he's not left-wing, he's nothing. I think his concern is to always has been to get into power and maintain power. The Israel lobby has been trying to get all these groups proscribed because they want to make it impossible to talk or openly about the situation in the Middle East. Israel had launched an unprovoked attack on Iran, which is a contravention of Article 2 of the UN Charter, the foundation of international law. All the Western powers backed Israel and their illegal attacks. So if the people who are meant to be the overseers of this system just completely disregard it when it's not in their interest, it doesn't exist. The mad little Rottweiler of the West in the Middle East, Israel, has exposed it all with this genocide, with their attacks on Iran, their attacks on Lebanon, their attacks on Yemen, their attacks on Syria. It's just endless. Israel has a policy of nuclear ambiguity. They never signed up to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which was in 1968. Iran did. Israel, North Korea, India and Pakistan are the only countries that aren't a member of that. So who's the rogue state here?
Matt Kennard, how would you like to introduce yourself?
Simplest is investigative journalist and author, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's not your first time here, is it?
I think it's my third.
Third?
Yeah. But first with you.
Well, it's all about to go downhill. We'll get into some of the investigations actually that I've seen that you've been doing over the last couple of months. But I think it's best if we start with Palestine Action, which we heard from the Home Secretary yesterday is going to be prescribed as a terrorist organisation. I saw that you described that as fascism.
I think it is, because essentially this is a non-violent direct action group that is trying to disrupt the Israeli war machine and the genocide machine through targeting factories of Elbit, which is the main Israeli weapons factory here in the UK. And also recently, obviously, doing an action at RAF Bryce Norton in Oxfordshire. And this is when you have a government which is criminalising dissent like that as terrorism, that to me is fascism, because it's saying you cannot have, you don't have any democratic rights if you are going against the government policy, which is participation in the genocide and has been for nearly 2 years. So, I mean, people might argue it's not fascism, but it's definitely on the way to fascism, because once you open the doors to that kind of thing happening, the government don't go back to number 10 and say, okay, we're happy, we've done that now. What they'll do when power gets new tools to exert that power, it goes after more and more groups, and it will go. It can go after people like XR, Youth Demand, all these different groups that have actually come under increasing repression in recent months, particularly under the new Labour government, actually. You know, there was a police raid on a Quaker institution where they arrested a load of young girls who were just organising and discussing actions about Palestine. So we're in quite scary times. And then the other side of that is journalists are being raided who are working on Palestine. Like Asa Winstanley, who works for Electronic Intifada, had his house raided by police. They took all his computers, his phones, things like that. That was one of the scariest cases, because they didn't even charge him. I didn't even know you could do that in the UK. The police can go into your house, raid you, take all your stuff, and not even charge you with a crime, which to me sounds completely preposterous. But this
doesn't sound legal.
It doesn't sound legal. And in other cases, Sarah Wilkinson, who was another journalist that was raided and carted off in a police van and taken and interrogated for hours, she was charged under the Terrorism Act. But what you're seeing is the misuse of the terrorism powers, which were mainly granted through the Terrorism Act of 2000. This is what the prescription of Palestine Action is being done under. And that was an act that was ostensibly about clamping down on terrorist groups who were a violent threat to us in the UK, people who would set off bombs or kill people for political reasons, not for people who are throwing paint on planes or smashing up drones, you know, stuff that actually, in the context of what we're seeing in Gaza, it is arguably legal, because the Genocide Convention and there's other legal instruments that allow people to to actually take action if a genocide is happening, and they can take action. There's arguments, if you talk to lawyers, that what they do is legal. I don't know enough about it to say whether it is or isn't, but that case can be made. It's definitely not terrorism, and I think it's an overreach, in my opinion. I think you're seeing the reaction of actually the mainstream, even in The Guardian published an editorial against it. Sally Rooney, the very famous novelist, she wrote an article in The Guardian saying, "I wholeheartedly support Palestine Action and will continue to do so even if that becomes a terrorism offence." That's a major thing. You have Zara Sultana tweeting today, "We are all Palestine Action." Jeremy Corbyn said he supports Palestine Action or along those lines. So I think it's going to be hard for the government in that context when people who are in the Houses of Parliament, people who are mainstream cultural figures, are saying that they're going to break the law. And it's preposterous, but what it shows is that they've lost control of the narrative. I think it's a show of strength, but a sign of weakness, because essentially over the past nearly 2 years, we've all of us watched on our phones some of the worst things we've ever seen, including at the moment starving people going up to aid sites and getting shot down. There were 50 killed today, they're saying, at so-called aid distribution centers in Gaza, run by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is an Israel and US-backed organization. Before that, we've seen tens of thousands of kids killed. We've seen thousands of kids without arms and legs because they've been blown up by Israeli bombs. I think the population at large understands the nature of Israel and understands the nature of the so-called Israel-Palestine conflict better than they ever have. And if you look at favorability ratings for Israel in this country, they're the lowest they've ever been. So in that context, when the government, which has the mainstream media on its side, obviously, and always has done largely, when it's lost the population, all they have left to go for is the law itself to discipline the population. And that's what we're seeing. And I think it won't work eventually. But in the short term, repression will get worse. And I'll finish with this, that it won't work because Palestine Action is an organization, but it's also an idea. And that idea is that as a decent human being, a moral human being, you do not sit idly by and watch while your government is participating, not just complicit, participating in a genocide. And you take action, in the case of Palestine Action, with their bodies to stop the wheels of that genocidal machine. You can't kill that idea because that's basic to us as humans. That's about human solidarity. That's in our DNA. So I think that they will fail, but we'll probably see a lot of people thrown in prison before they do.
I think that's sort of what the concerns that I have around this prescription. Yes, it is an idea, Palestine Action, rather than it being sort of a group with an ideology. The sort of things that they were doing were organising marches, which were repeatedly reported as hate marches. They would do sit-ins outside Elbit Systems. I went to one down in Kent, where these factories are supplying components to the Israeli war machine. The RAF spray painting was probably actually the most direct action that they've actually done. Mostly they just organise marches. And I wonder, what I worry about is if there are going to be Palestine marches after this prescription, will people be arrested as still being part of that quote unquote idea? But I'd be interested to know what you think about Keir Starmer in this, because when he was a human rights lawyer, he did defend a group of individuals who did something similar to planes that were headed to Iraq. Yeah,
at RAF Fairford. But it just goes to Keir Starmer and who he is as a person and as a politician now. He wasn't then, obviously, but he opposed the war in Iraq. I've done a lot of work on Keir Starmer and his history and his road to power. And basically that period was the only time he took a moral position on anything. And I think that what it was he was a young human rights lawyer, allegedly, and he saw the way that the public mood was going, and he sort of jumped on the bandwagon. And then after that, he's just done everything that the establishment has told him, particularly during his time at the head of the CPS from 2008 to 2013. So I think it's wrong to impute any ideology or any principle to Keir Starmer. He's not right-wing, he's not left-wing, he's nothing. I think his concern is to always has been to get into power and maintain power. And you see that with his just completely schizophrenic policies. Like when he wanted to be elected leader of the Labour Party, he presented himself as Corbyn 2.0, Corbyn in a suit. That was his whole line, and then every single one of those pledges was jettisoned within weeks, and then he fired Rebecca Long Bailey within a couple of months for tweeting an interview with Maxine Peake in The Independent, and that was so he straight away just went on an authoritarian kick. And I think the authoritarianism is his motif, because although he doesn't believe in anything, he does believe in power, and he has always shown that he's willing to be ruthless in exerting his power. And to be honest, the only thing that's actually had any the only sort of trend in terms of his premiership of the Labour Party and then Prime Minister is that he will take out the left and anyone who threatens his power. But just to go to what you're saying about the marches as well, because this is an important point. The proscription law under the Terrorism Act now is two things. One is it means that being a member of the group is illegal, right? But basically, Palestine Action undertake illegal activities anyway. I don't think that's the reason they're doing it. But the more important provision of that act, well, when it comes to proscription, is it outlaws voicing any support for those groups. So you can't say, I support Palestine Action. I think that's why they're doing it. They're not doing it because they need more tools to clamp down on Palestine Action. They're already doing that. They have many prisoners already in British jails. 18 of them, called the Filton 18, who shut down an Elbit factory just outside Bristol. But what they want to do is stop popular support for them. And stop popular support for the Palestinians effectively, and it will be an effective tool in that regard, because the people I mentioned, the journalists and activists that have been arrested, they've been arrested under the same provisions and raided under the same provisions, but for allegedly voicing support for Hamas and Hezbollah, both of who are prescribed organizations. Hezbollah was prescribed in 2019. Interestingly, that prescription was done at the behest of the Israel lobby. Not many people know the backstory, but a lot of it came out in the diaries of a guy called Alan Duncan, who was a foreign minister under the Tory administration from 2016 to 2019. And he's not a radical, but he has a pretty standard position on Israel-Palestine two-state solution. They should withdraw from the West Bank, stop occupying Gaza. But that's too much for the Conservative Party and the British establishment. He was widely attacked and eventually suspended for alleged anti-Semitism. He won that case. But anyway, in his diaries, he shows how that prescription of Hezbollah was done at the behest of the Israel lobby. The Israel lobby has been trying to get all these groups prescribed because they want to make it impossible to talk or openly about the situation in the Middle East with Israel and Palestine and Iran, whatever it is. Then there's been a long campaign by the Israel lobby to get the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, prescribed. They haven't even managed that yet. But it's preposterous anyway, the whole situation. Look, Britain First, this is an organization that the guy who killed Joe Cox was a member of. They're not prescribed. And they've killed an MP, or one of their members killed an MP, or a supporter killed an MP. It's crazy. Palestine Action have never hurt anyone. They've never hurt a human being. But what they have hurt and what they have damaged is the machinery of war. And when you have a situation where a government which has been participating in a genocide, and I'll qualify that because people are shocked when you say that, but it's not just arms, it's intelligence support. If you're providing intelligence from over Gaza to a genocidal power, then you're a participant.
I want to get into that properly with you, because let's come back to it. I'll let you finish the point.
If you have a government which is participating in a genocide and calling people who are trying to stop that genocide by just damaging weaponry terrorists, then as we started with, that's either fascism or on the road to fascism. It's very, very scary, and it's unprecedented as well. The Terrorism Act of 2000 has never been used to designate a direct action group terrorists. They haven't done that before. And it will open the floodgates. I hope that it won't happen, but there's two optimal ways that this will end. One is that there'll be so much pushback that they can't do it, or the other is that they'll do it and it becomes unworkable because it's so outrageous and it's such an overreach that you can't end up putting 100,000 people in prison if 100,000 people say, I support Palestine Action the day that it goes into law. I don't know, or they could just do what they pick off a few prominent figures to put in jail to send a message. They could pick off a few prominent media channels and do the same thing. We don't know, but we're in new territory. That's the important thing to say, and we're in new territory under a Labour government. Unfortunately, it's crazy. Things that I've described have all picked up and reached new levels under Keir Starmer. And people did warn about this before because his authoritarianism is known about. But things that we would expect if that step was going to be taken would be taken by the Tories were never taken by the Tories and are now being taken by Labour. And in fact, the Israel lobby has been pushing for the proscription of Palestine Action for ages, but the Tories didn't do it. And then John Woodcock, who is now an unelected Lord and was formerly the government advisor on political violence and extremism, he's been pushing this for ages. He's a Labour figure, obviously, but he's someone who's been funded by the Israel lobby, been funded by the Saudi regime. He went there in 2018 and 2019. Now, the Saudi regime is a genuinely dangerous exporter of terrorism. There was a famous case where there's a big arms deal between the Saudis and the British, which was organised by Margaret Thatcher in 1985, called Al Yamama, which was the biggest arms deal in history at that point. Anyway, it's riven with corruption, and there was an investigation by the Serious Fraud Office here, this is under Blair, into that case. And the Saudis, an official within the Saudi regime, you can read about this in The Guardian, it was an article in The Guardian. He said, if you don't nix this investigation, he threatened the UK with another 7/7. So we were threatened with terrorism by our so-called ally, who is an ally of John Woodcock and has funded John Woodcock. So it's all upside down. Everything, it's Orwellian. And I know that's an overused term, but when you have the government that is participating in a genocide, criminalizing the activists trying to stop it as terrorists, when you have the so-called government advisor on extremism being funded by one of the most extremist dictatorships in the world, the Wahhabi regime in Riyadh, it's Orwellian. The situation we're living in is Orwellian, and I think that history will venerate the Palestine Action activists when history is written, and damn the government that participated, and damn any supporter of that government, and damn any media figure who has supported this genocide, because what we're seeing, I also feel, is unprecedented. You know, I don't think we've seen this. What we're seeing with the aid distribution, you know, we haven't seen starving people be mowed down going to get food before. I haven't seen that. Like we're reaching new levels of barbarity every day, all supported by London, Washington, and Berlin as well. Well,
let's pull back a little bit. So what you were talking there about, you said the government are supporting the genocide.
Yep.
A genocide. Is this because of are you talking about the RAF planes that you believe are gathering intelligence on behalf of the Israelis?
Yeah, it's important to talk about the specifics, because there's two elements. One is military, one is weaponry, and one is intelligence. And the weaponry, we know we had nearly 200 arms licenses for Israel when the genocide began. Work I've done shows that 150,000 bullets were sent to Israel in October 2023, soon after October 7th, when the genocide began. We know that the 15% of the F-35 plane is produced in the UK, which the Labour government didn't suspend, by the way, in September 2024 when they suspended 29's arms licenses. They should have, but they didn't.
There's global supply chains.
Exactly.
They can't,
and also they never said what those 29's arms licenses were, which is highly suspicious. Now, a story I did recently showed that 8,000, we got data from the Israeli Customs Authority. It showed that over 8,000 quote unquote munitions of war had been exported to Israel after September 2024. So it's highly likely that whole suspension was a fraud and a farce, and organised maybe even with the Israelis. But anyway, there's the weapons side, which is material support. But I actually think if you look at where Israel gets its weapons from, the overwhelming majority of it is the United States. Then it's Germany, which is about 20%, and then we're kind of part of the rest, which is maybe like 10%. But we're not a big player in terms of the weapons. What we are maybe the major player in is intelligence. And when you say, which you claim, the government claims this. In December 2023, they announced we're going to start spy flights over Gaza for quote unquote in support of Israel. That's what they said. That's the government quote. And those spy flights continued up till the recent Iranian Operation True Promise 3. So up to about a week ago or 2 weeks ago, every single day nearly, an RAF plane would leave RAF Akrotiri on Cyprus. It's called a Shadow R1. It would go over Gaza for 4 or 5 hours, and that intelligence was being collected to go to Israel, which was carrying out a genocidal and has been carrying out a genocidal campaign in Gaza. So to me, unless I'm crazy, that's active participation. You can't collect intelligence over a territory which has been attacked by a genocidal power and claim that you're not part of that conflict. You can't.
Do you think the ICC will see it like that?
Well, they should do. I don't think so, because I'm shocked that the ICC even issued arrest warrants for Netanyahu and Gallant, because up till now, the ICC has never issued an arrest warrant for a Western leader or one of its allies. It's always been used as a tool against official enemies, many who have committed crimes like Putin. But and in fact, I think it was Lindsey Graham, the senator in the US, who was saying, I can't believe that the ICC has issued arrest warrants for Netanyahu and Gallant. The whole system wasn't set up for us; it was set up for them. You know, he was saying explicitly. But if the ICC was doing its job, it would investigate. The other side of it is, last summer in June 2024, the New York Times published an exclusive about a British spy team which had been sent to Israel, so inside Israel, which was providing help with the Israelis for their bombing campaign. And it was based on a leak from an Israeli official. He said, the British spy team is providing us with value added and giving us intelligence, quote, we can't get on our own. So again, these are all quotes, these are all facts. Does it not sound like a participant to a conflict if you're giving intelligence and working with the genocidal power to gather intelligence, which they must be using for their operations? I'll finish with this. The Shadow R1 plane, one of its major capabilities is target acquisition for military strikes. So we don't even know if the Israelis are using British intelligence to strike in Gaza. The only defense the British government have made, and they haven't been made to defend it, unfortunately, because the mainstream media doesn't ask these questions, and they should. But when they've been asked in Parliament by certain MPs, they say, well, all the intelligence we pass to Israel is for hostage rescue. But again, that doesn't cut the mustard. We need to know if Israel presents its whole operation in Gaza as hostage rescue operation, even though we know it's not. So that could just be semantic wordplay that gets them around the fact that they're actively involved in the bombing. And it is, to me, sometimes I feel like I'm going crazy, because how is it that the whole media is not focusing on this? You know, when they announced in December 2023 that they were going to start sending spy flights, they didn't say where they were going from, how long they were going to be in the air, or what plane it was going to be. Now, the work I was doing was the first that showed where they were going from, RAF Akrotiri, showing how long they were in the air, showing what plane it was. Why is this not being published in The Guardian or The Times or The Telegraph? Why is the mainstream media completely dropped the ball when you're talking about our government participating in a genocide? It's crazy. And this is, I'll finish with this, that is another reason why we need the ICC to get involved, because all the stuff I've described is mostly work I did, and is mostly based on open source stuff like flight tracking websites, New York Times leaks from Israel. We're still scratching the surface. I think if you started like actually having legal institutions which had the power of discovery and different legal mechanisms for getting information, you'd find that the participation is way, way deeper, because the institutions I'm talking about are highly secretive. Like the intelligence agencies, it's impossible as a journalist to get information from them. And that's not to protect us, that's to protect them from us. And can I just say one more thing, which is important? There's one more element, which is the SAS, which it was leaked to the Sun newspaper in October 2023 that the SAS, UK Special Forces, which is the most secretive part of the British state, had deployed to Cyprus for quote unquote Gaza operations. The following day, a D notice was sent out by the UK military, a censorship notice to all the British media. And from that day, we haven't heard a single word about what the SAS has been up to, either in Israel or potentially in Gaza. So again, we need legal institutions to investigate this stuff and find out, because we're talking about one of the worst crimes in modern history, and our government has been intimately involved and participating in it, and we're still scratching the surface.
It wouldn't just be journalists, though, who are subject to the sort of obfuscation or the, protected documents from journalists or such. But, it's also civil servants, because there was a case, I think it was just before the election, the civil servants who were working on the arms export licenses were not privy to what they were signing off, and they tried to take it to the High Court to gain access, and they lost that case. I mean, do you think... But that's gone through 2 administrations now, because that was during the Conservative government, and now you've got, obviously, Labour in power. Do you think that any report will ever reveal sort of the full extent of intervention or assistance that the UK supplied during this section of the war?
I don't think the government will release anything unless they're forced to. That's my sense, is that even the information we've got has been by sort of just bombarding them with different questions or finding novel ways to get information. There's no capacity or predilection to give any information, and I believe that's because there's a cover-up going on. I don't think it's too much to say that. There was a MP who kind of led under the Tory part of this horror show. He led the way in Parliament for trying to get information. He's called Kenny McCaskill. He's not in Parliament anymore. He lost in the July 2024 election, but he was previously MP for East Lothian for Alba, which is the splinter from the SNP party. Anyway, he asked a question in December, I think, 2023 about RAF at Kritiri, the base I mentioned, which is a 40-minute flight time from Gaza. And he was told by the parliamentary authorities, they said, you cannot put down a question about RAF at Kritiri now, which is, he said he'd never seen before. So usually if they don't want to answer something, they'll let the question go down and then say, we can't answer for national security reasons, or make up one of the many excuses they say for not revealing information they don't want to put out. But this was that they were saying, we will not put down a question about it. So that seems to show that there's, and it happened again recently, actually. Middle East Eye reported another MP puts a question down about RAF at Kritiri and was told you can't do that. And I think it's just because they know that if the full extent of their participation, complicity, whatever you want to call it, is revealed, they are legally liable. If you are shipping weapons to a power, which is, I think everyone can see that this is genocide. Unless you're paid not to, I don't understand how you can look at a picture of Gaza and not understand that this is genocide. Everything is destroyed. They're killing kids. They're killing people at aid sites. But I think that they know that they're complicit and participants in this, and they should be legally liable for it. And I'm not just talking about the current Labour administration. I'm talking about the previous Conservative one, because at least the Labour government said they would do, at least they did something in September 2024. It was a farce, it was a fraud, but they at least did something. The Conservatives just gave complete support. And in fact, in the September 2024 weapon suspensions by the Labour government, they said that we're going to stop any weapons that can be used in Gaza because we know that they could potentially be used for war crimes. Now, that makes the idea that you don't include parts for the F-15 ridiculous. Because that's the first time ever the government has said that there's a chance of war crimes being committed, which is the criteria for stopping arms licenses, and continued to send parts for weaponry that's doing it. So I think it will all come out eventually, because we're talking about a crime of such an extreme degree that work on this will not stop when the genocide stops. It will continue for years. And I think if we're going to do justice for all the people that have been killed, for all the kids that have been maimed, then we need to make sure that the people that were involved in those crimes face justice. Because the other thing is, the whole international order after the Second World War has just been completely blown up. You know, it is an unprecedented. I've never seen it. Even Iraq in 2023, which was a major crime, Bush and Blair, they niced up the language. They didn't make it so obvious what was going on. It also wasn't genocidal. Whereas now you have our allies going on TV. You have Gallant going on TV soon after October 7th and saying, we're dealing with quote unquote human animals, and we're going to withdraw all water, food and electricity from 2.3 million people, half of them children. That's unprecedented. And that's collective punishment, a contravention of the Geneva Conventions. But he did it, and there was no pushback from the Western powers which back Israel. So in that context, international law means nothing. It doesn't exist. If it's not enforceable, it doesn't exist. It's just there on paper and it doesn't mean anything. And you're seeing that again with Iran now, with the Israeli attack, which is a contravention. Israel had launched an unprovoked attack on Iran, which is a contravention of Article 2 of the UN Charter, the foundation of international law. Iran's response is legal under international law under Article 51, self-defense. But no one, all the Western powers backed Israel and their illegal attacks. So if the people who are meant to be the overseers of this system just completely disregard it when it's not in their interest, it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. And I think that many people are understanding that it never existed. It just wasn't tested. And unfortunately, the mad little Rottweiler of the West in the Middle East, Israel, has exposed it all with this genocide, with their attacks on Iran, their attacks on Lebanon, their attacks on Yemen, their attacks on Syria. It's just endless. And I think a lot of people are waking up. I definitely see people are more awake now than in my whole life, even more than 2003, which was the other major political awakening I saw, and actually was what politicized me as a person. I think this is much bigger, much bigger, because it's so stark and so obvious what's going on.
How harmful is our relationship with the US? I mean, particularly, we act as some sort of vassal state, I suppose.
Yeah.
A lot of the action or participation that has been taken, arguably, is to fall in line with the states. Do you think that relationship, there's an asymmetry there, and do you think that it's dangerous? I
think it's massively dangerous. I want our country, to be a sovereign country where we can make our own decisions based on the interests of British people, based on the interests of so-called British values, which we haven't actually exported, but we say we export, like peace and justice and all these different things. I want that. Whereas actually, as you say, we're controlled by the United States. We are part of the United States, effectively. There's hardly any, and if you talk to people in the Foreign Office, they'll say this, like that it's basically impossible for our government, Tory or Labour, to go against Washington's policy. And you saw this during the genocide with Labour and Biden. Whenever Biden made a policy change, literally the next day, the Starmer government, when it was in opposition and in power, would just fall in line, would literally repeat word for word what Biden has said. So you have a situation where London, our foreign policy is written in Washington. Arguably, I would say, we can get into this is a bigger claim, but Washington's foreign policy on these issues is written in and made in Tel Aviv. And that is a recipe for endless war.
Do you really think that? Because that there has been pushback, there has been red lines. You've seen Donald Trump today. Sometimes it seems farcical to use his words with merit, but you heard him today tell Tel Aviv, pull back.
Yeah, but it's all words. Why did he bomb Iran? He was maneuvered by Netanyahu into that. And if you look at if you look at his funders, like Miriam Adelson, she gave 10 million to his presidential campaign, dollars to his presidential campaign. He's surrounded by Israel First nuts like Mike Huckabee, Mark Rubio, Pete Hegseth. These are people, and there's many people in Congress like that as well, who see their first allegiance to Israel. There was a Congressman, Thomas Massey, who, when I think it was on Tucker Carlson, he was talking about how every congressperson, every senator has a AIPAC minder, like someone from AIPAC, which is an Israel lobby group, just minding them. This is a preposterous situation. I'm not saying that it absolves the US of responsibility, because there's also US has wanted to attack Iran for a long time as well, or elements within it, the neocons, etc. But it is a fact that
because it can't be allies with it, because it can't be friends with it.
This is how international relations work. It's like the mafia. If we control you, then you're fine. Doesn't matter about your human rights record. Doesn't matter about your political system if it's a dictatorship. you're fine. If you go against us and you're independent, we'll take you out. Look, this is why it always annoys me that when people talk about the human rights record of Iran, look, Iran is not a utopia. There's human rights violations in Iran, but a way worse dictatorship is Saudi Arabia. This is one of the most brutal dictatorships in the world. They just sentence someone to death for a tweet, and this is not a new thing. They do it all the time. This is the House of Saud was installed by the British in the 1930s, and we have 11 soldiers permanently based in Riyadh to prop up that regime. The US is in bed with the Saudi regime, but we never hear about that because they do what they're told. This is the variable. This is the only important variable for what I think is an American empire.
But I agree with you on the hypocrisy of maintaining a relationship with Saudi and not and the way that, compared to how we treat Iran. But Iran is a brutal regime, and I worry about sort of comparing or contrasting. Sort of putting them on a.
But it's important to talk
about, because there are women who aren't allowed. If they are found outside without wearing a hair covering. The brutality that they face,
but that's not why they're being attacked.
Of course.
Yeah, but the way that the US and Britain want to do it is they want to present themselves as the armed wing of Amnesty International, and that's the way the media presents them as well, like democracy, human rights, all the stuff we heard around Iraq. That's not why they're attacked. In fact, you know what? Iran was a democracy in the 1950s. Mm-hmm. They elected a guy called Prime Minister Mosaddegh, who in 1951, it was a parliamentary democracy like the one we have here. In 1951, he nationalized the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. And in 1953, MI6 and CIA took him out and installed a brutal dictator because he wasn't under control. And the red line for them is also you can't use the resources of your country to benefit the people who live on top of those resources. They've got to benefit our investors and our corporations. So
pulling that up to today, when Donald Trump and to some extent Netanyahu and Israel say that this strike on Iran was not for a regime change, that was not the aim. Do you think that is that a falsehood? It's
preposterous. The mad thing is, if you look into it, there's zero evidence that Iran has a nuclear weapons program. Zero. And in fact, it's not me saying that. Tulsi Gabbard, the US Director of National Intelligence, testified in Congress in March, so not even that long ago, like 3 or 4 months ago, that there's no evidence. The US found the same thing the intelligence services found the same thing in 2007. Ayatollah Khomeini issued a fatwa in 2003 saying that nuclear weapons were haram, so against Islamic law. And the other point about it is, look, there was a lot of diplomacy happening. In 2015, they signed the Joint Coordinated Plan of Action, which is also known as the Iran nuclear deal. It was a major breakthrough. It was signed by the P5 and +1, so the Security Council members plus Germany. And it was going to plan. So this meant that Iran couldn't enrich uranium higher than 3.67%, so civilian use. It meant that they decommissioned some of their centrifuges, which are used to enrich uranium. It meant also that enriched uranium would be exported out the country and made into fuel rods in France and then exported back to Iran. It was very punitive, and Iran signed it for sanctions relief. Now, what happened when everything was going to plan? Trump came in and in 2018 just pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal. And then in 2020, assassinated General Qasem Soleimani, who was the head of the Quds Force in Iraq. After luring him to Iraq, they drone bombed him, which is a major war crime and a declaration of war, in my opinion. You can't just kill a top general and it not be a declaration of war. And then after that, Iran were like, well, we're not dealing with people that are good faith actors that care about nuclear weapons. We're dealing with rogue regimes that just want to destroy us and want regime change. And then they started enriching uranium more, and it's got up to 60% now, but there's no way that's for nuclear weapons. That's because they want it as a bargaining tool. They're saying we want you to go back into the deal so we can get sanctions relief. But the Israelis and the Americans don't want that. What they want is regime change, I believe, especially the Israelis. And Netanyahu's basically said that explicitly. Now, the reason they haven't done that so far is I think that it hasn't worked what their plan was. I think Netanyahu tried and wanted to spark an uprising against the government with the attacks that he launched, and it didn't work. And they probably wanted to assassinate the Ayatollah as well, but that didn't work. So I think that they're pulling back now. You see a ceasefire now, which was signed, today or this morning. And then Trump said today that, I can't remember what he said. Can I swear on this?
Yeah.
He said they don't know what the fuck they're doing or something like that, didn't he? About Israel and Iran. And he had a go at Israel. But I don't know if any of this is true. Is it all choreographed? Right. There's been times, I don't know. He might be genuinely angry at Israel. It might just be theater to make us all believe that there's a breach between Trump and Israel, because he annoyed his base. The whole America First MAGA base. They're and his whole thing of I'm not going to launch any new wars. I think he's the first American president to ever bomb Iran. So after launching a whole election campaign saying these forever wars have to end and stuff,
running on a ticket that you weren't going to do anything like that.
So maybe all this is choreographed, and he's saying, I just wanted to do this attack, and Israel's making it hard for me. I don't know. I don't trust him at all. Obviously, no one trusts him, but I don't trust the Israelis. So I think it's 100% regime change, because there's no evidence that there was a nuclear weapons program. And it's not me saying that, it's US intelligence saying that. The funny thing was, Trump was asked about what Tulsi Gabbard testified to Congress. He said, well, I don't agree with her.
She's wrong.
She's wrong. So the evidence, it wasn't about evidence. It was about geopolitics and trying to remove the one remaining state-backed government which supports resistance forces in the region, because it is. You mentioned the comparison thing, but the point is, the Gulf states, Jordan, Syria now, are all effectively under the control of the US and the UK and the Western powers. Iran is the only one that isn't under the control of those powers. So, of course, they want to rectify that problem, and they want to get rid of them and install another Shah. Shah was the person who replaced the democracy, the dictator that we installed after we overthrew democracy there. That's why I think that, and also Iran has international law on their side. As I say, they were the ones who signed the Iran deal with the US and with us. And they were the ones that applied it. They were the ones that were getting inspected by the International Atomic Energy Agency, who were saying they're meeting all the requirements that the Iran nuclear deal stipulated. IAEA also said that they don't have a nuclear weapons program. So this is not something you can hide. This is, if you understand how nuclear weapons programs work, they're huge operations. And if you have snap inspections, there's no way you can hide them. You can't, and according to the IAEA, there's all the other requirements for a nuclear weapons program, like the delivery systems, the missiles and stuff, it's just not there. So Iran has a missile.
But then you also have like Lord, Dannett, I think it was Dannett, or Darek, might have been Kim Darek, who was positing that actually perhaps they're as deep as the Channel Tunnel, where all of this is being created.
There's no evidence of that. So, and also the other point is that's important to say is we know that Israel has undeclared nukes. So Israel has a policy of nuclear ambiguity, which is that they don't confirm or deny, but every sort of established organization said that they've got probably 90 and could quickly produce up to 200. And they never signed up to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which was in 1968. Iran did. Israel, North Korea, India and Pakistan are the only countries that aren't a member of that. So who's the rogue state here? Is it Iran who signed up to it and was abiding by its regulation, or is it the country that never signed up to it and doesn't allow any inspectors in Israel? And we know they have a nuclear weapons program also, because it involves where we are now, London. In 1986, Mordechai Vanunu, who was a whistleblower from within the nuclear weapons program in Israel, he came to London, he leaked it to the Sunday Times. It was a major revelation. He was snatched by Moscow. There was a honey trap in London. He was taken by a woman to Italy while he was under the protection of the Times. They didn't do their job. He was taken to Italy, snatched and taken back to Israel, where he was put in prison and then under house arrest. But we know for a fact, everyone knows that Israel has nukes. And Iran hasn't invaded another country for 200 years. They were invaded by Iraq in 1980, whereas Israel pretty much bombs a new country every day. So the whole thing is upside down. Iran is not the threat. If you look at a map of there's this famous meme that's on Twitter and places where they put all the American bases around Iran. They say, who's the threat, or like Iran. And if you're surrounded by bases of a country that said that it wants to destroy you for for decades, then you're the one that's being attacked. You're not the threat yourself. And I think that, as I say, this is becoming clearer to everyone. I think that it shows that there's no international law, because nothing can constrain Israel or Trump. Trump's attack was illegal. You can't just go and bomb the civilian nuclear sites of a country because you don't like them.
Well, I did find the line of questioning across broadcast yesterday rather bizarre on that, because I think it always concluded with any interviewee who said something similar to what you've said during this interview. The question was then posed, but you wouldn't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon, would you? Is that what you're advocating for?
Yeah.
I suppose the lunacy of all of this, it reminds me of every time we have a general election, and there was a particular time when Corbyn was pressed for about 10 minutes, I think, by David Dimbleby.
Yeah.
Would you push the button?
Yeah.
The lunacy of it all. I could keep talking to you. I think we should probably curtail it there, but where can people find you?
Twitter. Maybe. Twitter. No, I quit my job. I work for Palestine Deep Dive now. I'm not sure if you come across them. It's a really exciting Palestinian-led media project, which is based in London, which I'd say everyone should check out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Prescribe next week, yeah?
Hopefully not, but we'll see.
Thank you, Matt.
Thanks a lot.